Hey guys, it's Vince. Today in this video, I can't think of a better title than No Return Policy, because when you guys see this, I think many of you are really going to be shocked at what you're reading. I know I was. I've never seen some of the emails that in this conversation have gone back and forth, and I think it's really going to enlighten many of you, along with actual video footage to represent what this end user was going through. So stay tuned and we'll jump right in. Just to give everybody a heads up on what you're about to see, I had someone contact me through my YouTube channel as a potential client, and they explained to me some of the issues that they were having in terms of making a comment on a video. And then we went back and forth with some emails, and we went in more detail about what had actually happened. I went and checked out the channel of the end user and found out exactly what was going on, because he actually made video footage of the problem, and you guys can see this now for yourself.
I don't think this is normal when it's traveling straight on the X or Y axis. Linearly, it's smooth, but listen to it when it's doing circles. This can't be normal. I operate numerous CNC machines, and some with servos, some with stepper motors, and none of them have ever had be this rough.
All right, now we definitely know that does not sound right, and I know my novice guys out there, if you ever hear your table making noises of grinding or it sounds like gravel, you already know that it needs to be corrected. Linear motion should always sound smooth. He goes through and does some troubleshooting. We'll listen to what he finds.
At different feed rates, the feed rate right now is approximately 66. Slow it down to like
Okay, guys, he's making the proper adjustment. That is the correct thing to do. If you notice you're getting odd noises, of course, slow your feed rate down and see if those noises are adjusted in any way. Document what you find. If he's reduced his feed rate, and the rate at which he's reduced it is well within most tables' operating range, you should hear the sound possibly get better. And it's interesting what we find.
40s.
To me, it actually sounds like it got worse. Many of you will feel the same. If it does get worse, it's time to document further any testing you're going to do, and then you would follow through with exactly like you did and contact your vendor naturally.
Very rough. If I hit stop and just jog, seems smooth. Doesn't really matter the feed rate. Let's go really fast.
Okay, there's definitely an adjustment in how the machine sounds, but I think we can all still hear a slight ticking noise. This again should be identified to the vendor, and he is actually creating a recording, which I highly recommend. This way you can put everybody on the same page without them being there.
I go fast, it doesn't seem to be as bad. But it's still pretty annoying. When I actually use it for cutting, it's very choppy. It leaves a lot of chatter. When I'm cutting on straight edges, it is smooth. Please help.
Okay, guys, you can see this is when he initially reached out to the vendor for support. Naturally, hearing that, many of you would do the same. And like I said, after you've documented all the variables in terms of actually researching and trying to rectify the problem, naturally, that's the best thing you can do. That's what you paid, again, for a machine to be made for you, and they should be able to provide you the correct guidance to correct the issue. He wrote here, I built my machine, but it isn't moving very smooth when cutting circles. He basically describes the problem. It jogs smooth and runs smooth when there is linear motion, but not on radius and arcs. He explains what software he's using, and then he gets a response. Every CNC machine has resonance. This is normal resonance of this machine. The resonance is most present when all axes are engaged at the same time. A prime example is a very slow cut circle, just like you were showing. The machine is acting normal and just like every other machine. There is nothing to change and nothing to fix. Well, we know that's not true, guys. This is definitely not correct. And then he responds back, really, this is unacceptable crunchy motion. I have run and currently run multiple CNC routers. Once again, he goes into the time he's been running routers. To this does not look or feel like resonance. It feels like there's not enough points per rotation. The steps in the motors are too big, needs more resolution. This is billed as a high-end hobby machine. He's claiming he can run his business. And then he says there's got to be a way to make this run better. I looked into multiple CNC machines before purchasing one. And did I choose the wrong company to deal with me? Something needs to be done. And then we come back up for another response. And they said, although we do not support design software, you may verify settings within your Fusion 360. There were several threads, again, on their forum. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is this has nothing to do with CAM software. Him providing that information is great. I get that done to me all the time. Usually it's because the potential client or a client doesn't understand. CAM software really does not affect the way the machine runs in general. It's always going to be your motion control software. That being said, as we come up, it looks like here it also does this with Vetric. This is not normal. I'm quite disappointed in my purchase. Once again, the client is responding. You ignored my last comments about steps per inch. Is there a way to increase it? Now the vendor replies back, no, there is no change. Again, this is normal resonance of the machine. All blank are the same, and there is no fix for this. Meaning, basically they're telling him, or potentially you if you buy this machine, that this is normal. That is not true, guys. That is terrifying. We then see a response that says, okay, the client's asking what is the return policy? And it doesn't say much here. It says, have a great day. And I guess this is the client's response again. I can't just realize I wasted thousands of dollars buying a machine that I mostly can't use. I am more than a little upset about this. I'm not sure if he actually got a reply back about the return policy. I'm curious to hear about that. Looking at this again, here is the company's reply. It is normal resonance of the machine. There is no fix for this. If you're wanting to sell your machine, you can post it on the for sale or trade part of our forum. We're unable to help any further because the machine is operating as expected, and they tell them to have a great weekend. Guys, you're reading this. I mean, this is what it is. I'm just removing the company's information. We'll keep going. Again, the client, I want to decrease the torque and increase the resolution to test my theory. How do I do this with the dip switches, and what settings on the master required to change? Now, again, you guys are going to have to naturally research what you're buying. I cannot emphasize that enough. I'm not saying that their client did not do that, but the devil's in the details. And I say that to you all the time. Support is only going to be as good as what you pay. And we know that if you're paying, anywhere between $2,000 to $4,000 to $6,000 for a machine that's supposed to be fully done with a mass amounts of features, you better know who you're purchasing from and ask the questions up front before you buy the machine. Once again, we got a response back from the vendor. We do not suggest or support changing any default values. This could lead to the machine not operating correctly. You can check out the documentation that Masso has on their doc site if you want to make unsupported modifications. Now, it's interesting they're directing him to check out the documentation on the Masso site when their vendor's using that equipment. So if you're using those electronics to support the machine you're making, shouldn't you understand them enough to keep that documentation specific to your robot? These are general questions, purely logical, and this is why I'm telling you, research the vendors you're working with. We then get, I notice blank enlisted my post in the forum when I was looking for community support. Now this is really disturbing. And I'm going to read this again. I noticed blank enlisted my post in the forum when I was looking for community support. So now I get no support for official channels, and you are limiting me to getting support from the community. This is extremely unprofessional. What kind of company does this? I need help with the problem, and yes, it is a problem. So why will you not allow me to get it from the community? We get another response. And this is from the vendor. And once again, I'm stating this is from the vendor direct. Hi, blank. We've stated it a few times. This is normal resonance of the machine, and there is no fix. The post has been unlisted, as we've already given you an official answer. So guys, listen to this. They've removed his post on the forum. Think about that. So basically they're saying, we're going to pigeonhole you, and basically we don't want this to come out because, again, we're telling you that they feel it's a general built-in formality of this machine, this resonance. Again, we're unable to assist you further as it's not a machine issue, and the machine is working as expected. And then they wish him again to have a great weekend. Client then asks, I want to decrease the torque and increase the resolution to test my theory. How do I do this with dip switches, and what settings on the Masso are required to change? The vendor stated, we unlisted the link for you so you wouldn't get frustrated by others commenting and no solution given to you. As we've already stated, there isn't one. We didn't do it to prevent others from seeing it. We have relisted it for your convenience. This is completely unorthodox, and I'm going to give you my personal honest opinion is that they did not want any person basically slandering the machine on their forum. And again, they want to control what's being seen by the public. Again, they are a vendor. They're trying to sell their product. And an interesting point, guys, if you don't see a vendor selling in an open format where, again, they're out of control like eBay or Amazon, even Amazon now is kind of iffy, is you really want to look for more general sales. If they're only selling on their website, they have total control of what's seen, not seen, and this can easily become a real issue when you deal with problems like this. I mean, this you're reading for yourself. I'm not making this up. This is really frightening behavior, and definitely, again, not best practice. Buyers beware. Okay, the client responded back, I was correct. It's not the machine resonance, it's the weak motors and the low resolution they are set to. Maybe next time don't shoot down customers' attempts to find a solution. Some of your customers might have more experience and knowledge than you. Guys, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. Be very careful in emails of your context. If you come across sarcastic or disrespectful to a vendor and you need their help, what do you think is going to happen? You're most likely going to be thrown out to the wolves, because if they feel you're being disrespectful, they can give you the runaround or just not respond at all. I will personally contact any person personally if they make me feel like they're being disrespectful. My support is always there up until I do detect any sense of disrespect, in which case I'll respond and say, hey, I'm just trying to help. If I still detect disrespect or nothing changes, you can rest assured I'm done. So it is what it is. You have to really pay close attention to emails, once again, not showing context. You may be joking around, but the other person on the other end doesn't know that. He then continues, Here's a new video that shows the solved problem, and there's an actual problem that is fixable for everyone that has a blank series machine. Maybe pass the information on to someone in the company that can do something about it, because I guarantee your competitors' machines move a lot smoother than these. Once again, we're instigating a direct inflammatory response from the vendor, or you're just going to agitate the vendor, and at that point in time you're much better off just stop communicating, or take a step back and think, if I'm going to make a dispute to my charge, do I really want to show my charge that I'm being disrespectful to them? I mean, you have to think that every email is a document that could be presented for evidence to get your money back. If your money means something to you, I highly recommend being as respectful as possible in the emails. And once again, you'll definitely get a lot more bees with honey than you will with vinegar. Okay, the vendor replied and said, glad you achieved what you desired. You have, however, changed the default settings. This has two side effects. Number one, if you run into any issues in the future, you'll need to change back to default settings before we can assist you. And number two, you're running with basically zero torque now. Have a great day. It's an interesting response, don't you think, guys? I mean, that really doesn't sound like they're really trying to aid him in, getting the machine to work properly. Telling him that the machine has basically zero torque means that basically it's unusable. He then replies back, I know there is no torque now. I will need to replace the motors entirely with something stronger, as the stock configuration is unacceptable and underpowered. As for your support, you've shown that the support you will give is limited and lacks knowledge of your own products. Once again, we're getting into that mode of disrespect again, or what can be detected as disrespect. Again, he's frustrated. We understand that. Be careful on your wording. And he goes into, I have been retrofitting, converting, repairing CNC machines for over a decade. And then he says over here, now I still think the machine has potential to great things. The limitation seems to be the company that manufactures. Thanks for literally nothing. Once again, frustration. I totally get it. But always remember that you guys are much better off holding your composure. I know you're angry. I know you may be, working on deadlines. The best thing to do is walk away for a little bit, at least 24 hours, cool off, and you'll always put together the right words. Or if you can't, have someone there with you, your wife, your better half, your girlfriend, whoever it is. They will help guide you. It's much easier that way. The client responded by saying, why would you enlist my threat again? I found a solution, and if anyone else is looking for that information, it was available. Did I go against some community standard? Do you delete all the threads that list potential problems? I thought you wanted the community to contribute. This silencing of paying customers is a little shocking. Can you please explain what I've done wrong so I can avoid being censored in the future? I'll tell you what I believe you did wrong. I think many of the people listening and watching will agree. Once again, it's how you're writing. If you're coming across in a derogatory format, a disrespectful format, anything that can be perceived as that, where you may perhaps bring down the community, they're not going to let you post. And that's the truth. And unfortunately, you're buying direct on their website. It's their form. They're in direct control. And I tell you guys all the time, use a third-party source like eBay, Amazon, because it's unbiased, meaning you have a much better chance of dealing with them directly than the vendor you purchase from. I do it that way for that reason. I was hoping many end users would look at that. Some do, some don't. And it's really unfortunate, because the feedback you get is going to really drive a lot of more open source type behavior, where the feedback on these forums that are owned by vendors, you don't know what's real and what isn't. They own it. So again, guys, be very careful of who you deal with. Another case in point, think of the lead times. It's really interesting to hear that these guys are doing so well, these companies that claim to be doing so well, and yet there's always a month, 2 month lead time between you getting your machine. I've seen up to 3 months. Why is that? If they have the proper funding, you shouldn't be waiting 3 months for a machine. I could see maybe waiting 2 weeks, but 3 months or a month or 2 months, keep in mind, the longer that you wait to get your machine and you pay them first, the less time you have to dispute anything if there's a problem. And this is something that you really have to take into consideration, and realistically look at it from this perspective. It's interesting they take your full deposit instead of half. Most of them want all the money up front. Why is that? Because they're building with your money. That's why. They're not actually supplying the parts. I always try to keep my inventory on hand, but I don't build tables. I know my limitations. I don't have the support for it, and therefore I don't do it. Everybody is different, but keep in mind these are telltale signs and red flags that all buyers should be considering when they do their due diligence.
Here's a follow-up to my previous video about the motion stability. Solution was for me to sell the machine because of natural resonance that is in the machine causing that chatter. I knew better because I have plenty of experience. I suggested to them it's because of the amount of steps per revolution they're using is only 400, and that limits the amount of motion. I upped it to 2,000 using the dip switches on off, on, off, on all of them, on X, Y, and not the Z, but both, on B, I mean, X, Y, and B. Changed them both to 2,000 and listen to the sound. It's gone. So the problem is the low resolution in the motors. It can be fixed with better motors. These motors would work, but I increased the torque increased the steps from 2,000 or from 400 to 2,000. So that means it's probably only receiving about 20% of the torque that it used to have.
Okay, guys, I'm on Masso's site. You can see that up here. And then as we come over here to the shop tab, you'll see the Masso G3 listed, and then underneath that is the sensors and accessories. When you click on sensors and accessories, you can come over here to the Masso closed loop stepper motor, also known as their servo motor. Now, as you scroll down, you can select what model of this you'd like to purchase. Here is where you're going to find what model produces what torque in Newton meters. Now, many of you may not know what a Newton meter is. That's fine. You're going to use the link I'm going to put in the description to check out what your motor's ounce inch rating, which is more appropriate in this industry currently. So we've got 2 Newton meters or 3 Newton meters. We'll come over here and we will go Newton meter 2. And you can see you got one motor at 283 ounce inches and the other one is 3. And the other motor at 424 ounce inches or inch ounces. Now the thing to keep in mind is this. When you start making adjustments to the motors in terms of resolution, meaning if you start messing with the micro steppings of the drive itself going to the motor, you will affect the actual torque rating on the motor in their particular instance. So when you do that, you have to keep that in mind of what you're actually going to be getting. Apparently, when this manufacturer selected these motors, they must have known to some degree that this was an issue. And why I say that is we'll look in the email at their response and you guys can be the judge for yourself, but they pretty much openly admit that what this client found is going to cause him to basically have motors that don't produce enough torque to be used for cutting. Okay guys, so we have the email here from the company going back to the client, and it says, glad you achieved what you desired. You have, however, changed the default settings. This has 2 side effects. If you run into any issues in the future, you'll need to change back to default settings before we can assist you. And number 2, you're running with basically 0 torque now. Now this is interesting because you would have assumed that the company would have engineered the table with motors knowing that this potential issue existed if they tested it. Now what he's experiencing really is interesting because he documented it with video. And you're watching the video that I'm seeing and you're seeing. So now if we factor in that he calculated he'd be getting about 20% of the output torque that the motor is rated to, you're basically looking at 56.6 ounce inches of torque, guys, which basically turns this router into a 3D printer. Again, this is completely unacceptable and not something anyone should have to do. So please be careful of what you're dealing with. And you guys have heard the emails. We'll go through and keep analyzing the rest of the system.
The solution would be to replace the motors with bigger motors that have higher resolution.
So after the potential client contacted me through YouTube, he then asked me if I would like to see the enclosure and see how everything is built. And of course, I'm always interested to see whatever you guys will show me, and we can go over and learn from it. And this is exactly what he sent me, so let's discuss it.
This is the power box for the Masso controller.
Okay guys, we can see that within this electronic enclosure we have here that basically there's no drives in here. It is just a power supply and essentially a remote power module. Now with the Masso you'll see two types of systems. They'll either have the drive and the power supply there, or they won't have the drives and therefore it'll just be a power module. That is what we see here. That being said, you do not need shielded cables because there are no signals going back and forth with this unit. The only thing you're doing is providing power. We also see ground leads coming in, and that is done correctly. The wire management is a little shoddy. We're using crimp connectors, and that's questionable. I prefer solder leads, and I've explained that in previous videos, but this is really not built as bad as it could be. And when I say that, the only thing really missing is an exhaust fan for the enclosure. We have one on top of the power supply, which is for exhausting any hot air within the unit. But if we have an exhaust fan on the external enclosure, it will once again clear out all of that hot air from condensing inside there, which could cause overheating issues. So overall, it's not perfect, but it's also not the worst we've ever seen. This is really not that bad. We're going to take a peek at the cables going to the drives from the Masso. This is where things have to be done correctly.
It's basically just an aluminum enclosure with 36 volt power supply that's 350 watt. Surprising, it actually is a Meanwell one. The inputs on the back are, it's got the main input and it's got a secondary input for a vacuum, so you don't run them off the same circuit breaker. Outputs for the controller and the vacuum with some fuses on the back. The front panel, this board basically is just got a 24 volt converter and output for this, which goes to the Masso. This is 36 output for the motors, and those are just...
Okay guys, we do have him using plastic Molex connectors. These are not in best practice to be used for this application, mainly because you can see right here on where that plug is, where one of them is actually plugged in, and I'm not talking where the Masso is, I'm talking about where one of the motor cables is plugged in. It's flexing. And again, these are not designed for that. These type of connectors are ideally used in PC cases. You see them used all the time because there's no movement. But like I've explained in previous videos, that when you're dealing with these type of connectors, you're dealing with a robot. Robots have active cables because they're always moving. Therefore, any type of flexing repetitively, you're definitely going to see fatigue in these type of connectors, and connection issues can follow next. The other thing is that they only have a nylon clip on them. You're much better off with a GX16 or a DB9 connector because, again, they screw lock. G540s use DB9s. IDS drive system, individual drive system, should always use a GX16 because not only do they plug in, once again, they do have that screw locking feature that assures that the connection will always be as it should, nice and tight.
Fuses for the motors. As you can see, none of these wires are shielded.
We see here that we just have stranded leads coming through a nylon braid, which is similar to what's seen in a PC case. This is no substitution for the proper double shielded cables. They will cost more, but you do not have to worry about EMI, which once again, your electrical noise in both high and low frequencies that are present with robotics. You guys need to pay very close attention to this. I do not care if you're using a closed loop servo or if we're dealing with a stepper motor. These should be double shielded in best practice. We see this done on many systems because, again, it takes more time, more labor, and vendors look at that as a loss of profit. Let's be real.
Anyway, they're just covered in plastic wrap.
It's always interesting to see when a vendor actually uses a GX16 in a different location, and in this particular instance we can see it installed here, yet he goes and uses the Molex connectors for his cabling, which again, it's very interesting when they selectively choose what connectors they use, and it's almost by accident that they use the correct connector and then go back and switch over to Molex again.
And they go into the back of this Masso controller. This one is for the motors and the limit switch. This one powers it and I guess sends TTL information to these relays to turn off the vacuum and router spindle, not spindle but router. These other, see what's coming in? It's just a bunch of connectors. It does look like they siliconed them afterwards.
Okay, guys, as we were discussing, you can see that they used a glue. It's probably hot glue, could be silicone, like you said, but they do this on the connectors so they stabilize them from movement. Because again, we want to make sure that there is no movement and that these are rigid connectors. This is really not, again, the best application for these type of connectors. GX16s would have made these much, much better.
And it just goes into a bundle of unshielded cables. And then this goes down to the buttons on the front and the e-stop, the USB connector. The screen is hooked, touch screen is hooked up through USB. It's got this wireless antenna up there, just taped on, it looks like.
Okay, guys, once again, we are seeing the system just being wired with bare leads. These are not cables, certainly not double shielded cables as they should be. There's no ground bus bar in here. Masso on their website does discuss grounding. I actually covered this in my CNC fail with the Masso controller. Again, we can't always just blame the end user. We have to blame the manufacturer as well. They should really disclose how these systems should be built. And really, if you're selling these systems, you should be held accountable to understand and be knowledgeable on this practice. If the vendor didn't know what they were doing, they should have contacted the electronics vendor, as you would do directly if you purchase from them, and get this information so that you know you're doing it right the first time. Unfortunately, this will cost this end user more money to correct the mistakes made and get his system running as it should. Okay, guys, that wraps up this video. And once again, I want to thank you all for your support. Hopefully you learned something with this, and I cannot emphasize enough, buyer beware, do your homework, ask the right questions. Again, $4,000 to $5,000 is going to set back a lot of people to recover from a mistake like that. And even if you have to reinvest over and over again, it's going to get even harder than that. So please keep that in mind. I want you guys to be aware of what you're getting involved with. Take care.